mother was boiling some water, and she saw that her child was walking up to the stove. She knew what he was probably going to do and to touch the flame that was there. She told him, "Don't touch that, you'll burn yourself." And he immediately listened. The problem is that this child acted like most children. He might have listened for a little bit of time, but sooner or later, he touched that flame and found out his mother was right. He burned himself. That idea that we need to hear, to listen, and to do it. You know, we have a great example of that in the scriptures today, both with the calling of Samuel and the calling of the disciples of Jesus Christ. That first, you have to hear. We see that with Samuel. He hears what God is asking. He hears that God is calling him. Now, he misinterprets it because he hears a fatherly voice and thinks that it is someone else. But yet, he hears what God is saying. And then he listens. He not only hears that God is calling him, but he actually understands that God is calling him to get out of bed. You know, sometimes that's hard to do, getting out of bed, especially when it's as cold as it is outside right now. But he listened, and then he did. He was active in what he heard. He heard, he listened, and then he did. We can learn a lot from these people in the scriptures today about our relationship with God. You know, as Catholics, we're very good sometimes at talking to God. We have lots of prayers that we can say. We have times in which we do petitionary, intercessory prayer. We even talk to God one-on-one. But then, we don't always listen to what God says. You know, first of all, in that listening, we have to hear what God is telling us. It's sometimes hard to hear what God is telling us when we have so much noise around us. You know, so many of us will say, well, I have the radio on all the time, or I have the TV on all the time so that I can have background noise. It's hard to hear God in the background noise. We have to take that time of quiet to listen to God, to listen to how God is speaking to our hearts. So first of all, we have to hear. Then we have to listen. That sometimes we have to interpret what God is saying to us. God might be saying something to us today that first of all, we're not hearing, but second of all, we're not listening to it. We're not listening in such a way that we're open to doing what God wants. That God speaks to us, and then we don't want to hear that. We don't want to be able to hear that God is telling us to do certain things in our lives. But we have to listen and to be able to do what God wants. So we need to hear, to listen, and then to do. Are we doing what we hear God ask us to do? Sometimes what God is asking us to do is very easy, and we can say yes. Sometimes God asks us to do things that are very easy, and then we say, no, I don't think so. I'm too busy. I got other things to do. You know, sometimes we have to do those easy things that we hear God ask us, because God sometimes asks us to do very difficult things. Asks us to make amends with someone that has hurt us, to help someone who is in need that we don't have time for. That sometimes God asks us also to do the hard things. How are you doing at these things? Are you trying to hear what God has to say to you in silence? Are you listening attentively to what he is telling you? And then, are you doing whatever he asks?